Last week, a California state jury found Meta and Google responsible for the anxiety and depression that a woman suffered as a child because she became addicted to their social media platforms, and they awarded a large number. What was it about this case that brought it so much attention in the media, and why was this verdict important? I want to go into how this all started, what this case was about, what the claims were, what the defenses were, what the jury's decision was, so you understand better why this was a very important trial. As far as the verdict, it was $6 million. Now, $6 million is not a lot of money to Meta and to Google, but the implications were way beyond the award. What the jury found was the platforms that Meta and Google have are defective, that the design of the algorithms behind these platforms are defective. This essentially was a products liability case alleging a defective product. That is very important, and I'm going to explain that in a bit. The claim was that these algorithms were engineered to exploit the minds of children. The algorithms were addictive, and these companies knew it. And that's why they awarded the money. And even though the money's not too much, this theory is going to have big ramifications going forward. This case was reminiscent of the tobacco cases back in the 90s. The tobacco cases were about a dangerous product sold to minors. These cigarettes were targeted towards minors and sold to minors, and the companies knew that the product was harmful, that it could cause cancer. And after these huge verdicts against the tobacco companies, they had to change their marketing, and they had regulations now that prevented them from targeting children in their ads and targeting children for their products. This case that came down last week is really the big tobacco moment for the tech industry of today. There are many more kids who use social media today than there were kids back in the 90s smoking cigarettes. Our story really begins in the late 90s when online service began. These social media platforms really didn't become popular until the mid to late 2000s, and these platforms didn't really explode until like 2020. What happens in these cases is the complaint is brought and the case begins, and there are motions. There's all kinds of issues that are being decided before a trial even starts. And in this case, one of the issues that came up was a very important issue that, if it went against the plaintiffs, would have eliminated the case, would have dismissed the case, and there would have been no trial. That issue involves Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. It's referred to by the lawyers as the Section 230 defense. What the Section 230 defense refers to is a freedom of speech argument brought by the online providers. What do I mean? What happened was in 1996, when all this started with AOL and other early providers, there was content being put on these online platforms, these online things. And somebody said something about someone else on AOL, whatever their platform was at the time. And it wasn't a nice thing. So the person who was the victim of it claimed libel, that they were damaged because of something that was said on this platform, this AOL platform. And they brought a lawsuit. So the person who brought the lawsuit didn't just sue the person who made the bad statement, they also sued AOL. They said, well, this happened on your platform and you allowed it, so you're part of it, and you should be responsible for the harm I suffered just as much as the person who made the bad statement. So that went to trial, and it went into the courts, and essentially what was found in that case was that the AOL provider, the online provider, was right. The AOL provider was found in this case to not be responsible for the bad things that were said by one of the people who were using its service. The online provider was found to just be a host, and they provided the place for these people to talk, but they can't be responsible for what was said between the people. And from there, it became law that these online providers had immunity. And for decades, this law has been in effect, it's still in effect, and it gave the online providers, and those online providers grew to many different providers till today, And they've used this defense, this 230, this Section 230 defense, as a means of claiming immunity. We're not responsible for what goes on. We're just the host. So if it's content that's the problem, don't blame us. And the court said, you're right, we won't blame you. So how did the plaintiffs get around that in this case? Well, they were good. They were creative. What their argument was in defense of this claim was to say, hey, we're not talking about the content on your sites. We're talking about the algorithms, the engineering behind it. We're claiming that the algorithm and the online site itself was created defectively, that there is a design defect in the algorithm that you, Meta, you, Google, that you created. So it has nothing to do with the content. It's the way the product is used, and the product was defectively designed, thus taking it out of this libelous, content-based argument and making it simply a defective product case, similar to a car case where the brakes fail and they were made improperly. Here, the plaintiff said, you, Meta and Google, you're responsible because your product is defective, not because anything that was said between people who were on the platform. What they did was they shifted this from an editorial function to an engineering feature. And that was very smart, and it in fact worked. And this motion that was made by the defendants to have the case dismissed pre-trial on the Section 230 ground was denied. So the case went to trial. So let's talk about the trial. What was it about? It was about this woman who was only identified by her initials, KGM. And she was 20 years old at the time of the trial. Her claim was that when she used these platforms, when she was 6 years old and when she was 9 years old, she became so addicted to these platforms that it affected her mental health, caused depression, caused anxiety, and caused her other mental harms. And that was her claim. You should know that originally the case was brought against Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, and Google, which is YouTube, and also TikTok and Snapchat. So it was really four main defendants. What happened before the trial was that TikTok and Snapchat settled. Now, we don't know the terms of the settlement because it was confidential, but the case continued now against the remaining defendants, Google and Meta. And the case went on for 6 weeks, and the jury was out for 44 hours, 9 days. And one of the highlights was the fact that the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, he testified. He came into court and testified, and he tried to defend the safety record of his company and claim that they were protecting minors. But on cross-examination, he was faced with evidence and documents from Meta that showed that they knew the algorithm was addictive and that they still went ahead because of the metrics and because of the money they were making charging ads on their platform, that they kept it going and did not change the algorithms. And they knew that there were millions of kids under 13 who were using their platform. So what were the general claims that were brought? The first claim was the defective design claim. So that claim was brought in defense of the motion that was made before the trial. The features on these platforms were the evidence and the support for these claims that they were addictive. Things like infinite scroll, meaning you scroll through your feed to see what's on there, and it never ends. It just never stops. You scroll, and there's no end to it. And of course, that can lead to something being addictive. This is the claim. This was the claim. Also, other features like autoplay and things like that were presented to show that these features, in fact, could be and were, in this case, addictive. Another claim was failure to warn, meaning that these companies, Meta and Google, knew that these products were addictive and they were made that way, and they didn't tell anybody. They didn't warn the parents of the minors who were using the platform. They didn't warn the people who were on the platform. That was the failure to warn claim. And the overall negligence claim against these companies was that their own internal research showed that the harm was evident, that these algorithms can cause mental health issues, can cause body dysmorphia, anxiety, depression, these kinds of claims that were made. And they knew that, and yet they still, because of how much money they were making, they ignored that and continued to put the product out there with these problems associated with the algorithms. Essentially, the claim was that they were prioritizing their engagement over the safety of the children using the product. So then, what were the defenses? They defended the case vigorously, and they made good points. Obviously, the jury was out for 9 days, so there was a lot to think about. So what were the defenses that were raised by the defendants here? First, they claimed that there was no connection, no link between what they have in their product, what their algorithms are, and an addictive result, a clinically addiction diagnosis kind of thing. So they said, hey, we know that people use our product a lot, and we know that it could cause harm, but it's not really because of the algorithm. They're saying it was overuse. If somebody overused the product, it would be a problem. Just like people overuse things in life. People can drink too much, people can do this too much, and it can become a problem that needs to be addressed. And they're saying that's really what happened in this case. It was people overusing the product, but these people weren't clinically, medically diagnosed with addiction. And they were saying there's a difference between someone who just likes to use the product a lot and then someone who clinically becomes addicted, and it's a real health issue. But perhaps the bigger argument, and in my opinion, what was probably in the jurors' minds when they were deliberating, was the question of where are the parents in all this? The parents are bringing these cases on behalf of their kids, but where were the parents when all this was going on? After all, we're talking about minors, people who live at home, presumably with their parents, and aren't the parents in the best position to see what their kids are doing? Shouldn't they put some rules in effect with the kids and tell them to stop using, and how often they're on the phone and who they're talking to and what games they're playing, what platforms they're on? The parents, the defendants claim, are in the best position to know what's best for their kids and to regulate their use of social media and anything else that's going on. This is a parental problem. This is a parental responsibility to supervise your own kids. And that's a good argument. I would bet that that was a big part of why these deliberations took so long. So that argument was made, and I'm sure it resonated with some of the jurors. So those were the main claims and defenses. And what happened? The jury, after all this deliberation, they issued $6 million in damages. The $6 million was broken down into $3 million as compensatory damages and $3 million for punitive damages. What's the difference? Compensative damages issued to make the plaintiff whole, meaning her injuries were that she was depressed, anxious, and suffered mental health issues. And the jury heard those damages and said, okay, what is that worth? Now, that's always the toughest thing in any personal injury case, is deciding what's the value of any injury. It's very subjective, and people have all different ideas about what something's worth. In this case, the jury heard her injuries and decided that what happened to her and her injuries were worth $3 million. Okay, so how did we get to $6 million? Because the jury also issued punitive damages. Punitive damages are very different. Punitive damages are awarded when the jury wants to punish the defendant. How do you punish a defendant like Meta or Google? Last time I checked the stock market, Meta is worth $1.5 trillion. What number is going to make them think twice about having an algorithm that maybe is addictive and harming kids? What kind of punishment can we put on here to make them hear this and to change their behavior? Well, they came up with another $3 million to total $6 million. Obviously, this is also not a number that's going to affect Meta terribly at all, really. But it's really not the number in this case. It's the fact that there are at least 10,000 more cases currently pending against Meta and these defendants with the same, if not worse, injuries that are out there. So this is a precedent. This is something that is going to affect future juries. The jury found that the design of the algorithm was defective, right? This addiction resulted in mental health issues, anxiety, depression for this woman. And that is significant. And the jury found that Meta and Google knew about it. They found that this was something that was a problem, and it was known to the people who were in a position to change it, and they didn't. So what the jury also found was that the percentage of fault was split. So that's what happens when there's a case with multiple defendants and there's a verdict for responsibility. Whose fault is it? You split up the apportionment of fault between or among the defendants. The jury found that Meta was 70% responsible and that Google was 30% responsible. So if they ultimately have to pay this award, and there's appeals and stuff going on, but if they ultimately have to pay whatever it is they have to pay, Meta will pay 70% and Google will pay 30%. So what are the implications of this verdict? The first implication is that 230 defense that we talked about earlier, that was the pretrial decision that was made. That's significant because now going forward, similar cases will get to trial quicker because this issue is now resolved. It's precedent. This now was a decision made by a California state judge who said that this Section 230 did not apply to this case in the sense that the social media platforms did not have immunity because it wasn't about the content. It was about the engineering of the algorithm. Now, of course, what happens in California isn't necessarily precedent for what happens in New York or in other cases or in other states, but the fact that this decision was made is significant, and it can be cited by other judges in the future as being right. Not to say another judge still may find it different, may have a different outcome, but this finding is very important going forward. Next, the implication of the floodgates opening regarding the 10,000 plus other cases that are currently pending against Meta, Google, and other online platforms for the same injuries. So given this verdict, the defendants and the plaintiffs in these other cases know what happened. It was widely covered, internationally covered in the news. So this being the result is going to have an effect on the future cases that are coming down the pipe. Another implication, hopefully, is that these online platforms will now reconfigure their product. They will now, hopefully, create algorithms that will not be harmful to minors, that won't be addictive, that they're going to put in place safety features that are going to prevent these harms from occurring to kids. What's also important as a result of this case is the new generative AI companies that have now sprouted every week. There's a new company that's coming out with AI. It started with ChatGPT and Gemini and all this stuff. Every day there's a new AI company that's out there looking to get your business, but they're also targeting kids. So this verdict is a warning signal to these companies coming out. Hey, great products, but you're going to have to do something to make sure kids are not harmed by the way these platforms work. Look at what happened in California, and you better build an algorithm and a platform that doesn't harm kids. This verdict is going to be appealed by Meta and Google unless they reach a settlement somewhere along the way, but they will appeal it. They have the money to pay the lawyers to appeal many decisions, including the verdict that was issued by the jury. But the verdict, while the number is not big, the implication of the verdict is huge. And hopefully, this verdict will cause a seismic shift in the industry where these social media platforms will now create algorithms that are not harmful to the mental health of children. The big winner in these cases is not necessarily this plaintiff. It's the kids who are now going to be hopefully protected by better algorithms that are not going to be harmful to their mental health.